good morning, and welcome to our Sunrise Sunday support group call. So awesome that we're all here together on this beautiful sunny day where I am for this moment of peace and solace and compassion in a safe space filled with love and our mutual desire to heal ourselves and our families. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And this morning, we have back as our very special guest, our resident expert, Dr. Linda McGhee. Dr. McGhee is a clinical psychologist, attorney, and nationally recognized mental health expert and speaker. She actually just landed in Toronto, where she is speaking today at a big event. Dr. McGhee has been featured in the Washington Post, Forbes, New York Times, Huffington Post, and Grown and Flown. She recently appeared on BET's America in Black on the state of mental health in the Black community, and she has provided commentary for Washingtonian Magazine on the intersection of racial trauma, COVID-19, and mass protests. She is an author of a chapter of a book on bipolar disorder and the essentials of multicultural assessment. She has also served on the clinical faculty at the Washington School of Psychiatry and is a former adjunct professor at George Washington University and the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. She currently serves as the former president of the Maryland Psychological Association, and she is an incredible friend, board member of SonRise, and incredible advocate and ally. She's been with us since day one, which was 4 years ago, and she is
4 years.
4 years, 4 years, over 4 years, and she has agreed to be here every month for us. She does this volunteering her time, of which I'm so appreciative. And that's what today is for. Today is an open session. We said we will do these once a month because we need a space where we can open up and share. And so with that, I invite everyone to feel comfortable opening up and sharing if you have something on your heart this morning. And before we do that, Dr. Linda, let me just say thank you for being here, for hopping off a plane, getting through customs, and being on the phone. I really appreciate it. We all appreciate it.
Good morning, everybody. You see, I even have a mask on. So,
Yes, smart.
um, good morning. How are you all doing today? I'm so happy to be here with you, and I want everyone to share what we got to share. I'm going to start by just having a little conversation with Kelly about something that's been sticking in my mind. Just the way how when we were talking right before we came on the line, we were talking about maintaining our equilibrium, maintaining our mental
Yeah,
health. And sometimes that means that you got to continue to change things up. What worked last month may not work this month.
right.
If you want, as our girl Beyonce says, if you want things to stay the same, you got to change again, right?
That's
Um, so I just want to say good morning to everybody on that note. Toss it out there for comments, questions. But I on my way up here, I listened to Cowboy Carter. So that was the lyric that was on my mind this morning.
mm. Well, when you called, when we got on this call a few minutes ago, I was sharing that I was on the phone with Kyle, and
Mm-hmm.
it was an hour and a half, and
Mm-hmm.
I just listened, which was really different for me, just
Mm-hmm.
completely listened, and I think he needed a place to talk, and he was sounded a little inebriated maybe, or it's on, I don't
Mm-hmm.
know exactly what was happening, but it's what, 6 a.m. out there. So he called me around
Right.
4 a.m. his time, and we were on the phone
Mm-hmm.
this time and
And you listen.
just listened. But I could feel so much pain. And then during part of he went all back to high school, and the first time he was taken away to a to wilderness, and how that
Mm-hmm.
was so traumatic. And he
Mm-hmm.
went through all these things, and how he broke out of
He's
one
he's
place.
clear. He's clearly fixated on that.
Yes, and I I invited him I said, Kyle, would you be willing to talk to somebody, to speak with someone? Then that was a whole nother 30 minutes of no, I'm never speaking to a
Hmm.
therapist again. And I know all this and I know what they're going to say and I know how to. It was really disheartening on some levels. And
Hmm.
yet it felt I was able to, I was choosing to see the positive in which it was that he called and he wanted to hear a friendly
Right.
voice. And so
Right.
I tried to stay on that positive side, but I was thinking,
What
gosh,
what is it?
he needs to get
What does
help.
it? What does it feel like to not have to not jump in and solve?
Felt really, what did it feel like? It felt it felt like I've made progress. I felt actually good that I was able to just listen and just let
Hmm.
him talk. That was
Hmm.
major progress. So that actually felt
Anybody out? Anybody out there struggling not to solve? And I can't see the chat being Kelly. So
good. Okay. No one said
anybody?
anything except good morning. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. I know that with a 20-something-year-old child, it's very hard to not to just listen, even if what you're thinking is just all kind of messed up, right?
Mhm.
What you're talking about, that's some really just sad, messed up decision making. And sometimes it's just the hardest thing, just to listen to them and how their life is going, and not automatically jump in
Right.
Eh,
and
That
finding peace in that.
if
D.
I
I think it's Jules. Good morning.
Okay,
good morning.
Jules.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to talk about this part is sometimes when they're having these conversations, I think part of the hardest thing is when it's not as logical to me and it's logical to them. And
Mm-hmm.
knowing that they're trying to make their way. I mean, recently my son removed the bed frame from his room and he was like, this frame doesn't fit me. I need to put things back in the order in which I feel would be best for me and the way that I'm thinking. And it's not the box that folks are putting me in. And in theory, I could understand it, but the process of completely redoing and the structure of his room was something that I had to really catch myself. I was so triggered, like, who does that? But then as
Right.
they're going through, they're trying to figure out, I guess that struggle of just trying to figure out his space in this world or figuring it all out.
Mm-hmm.
Just a
And
challenge. And I
what?
challenge is just
Right.
like coaching from the side. And that's what my therapist works on me on, which is you're coaching from the side and not
Mm-hmm.
directly. And that is just such a huge shift while they're
Right.
figuring out. I don't know. Just thought I'd throw that out
And
there.
even talking about coaching from the side, like I'm gonna take the analogy and move it to a car. Like first you're in the driver's seat, then you move to the passenger seat of the front, then you sit in the back seat. But when they get to be of a certain age, you're in the back seat, but you're reading a book, right? Your only job is to like interact in an emergency, or when you just think something is clearly wrong and it's going to impact them in many, many ways. But even then, you can only say what you think. Son, this is what I think. But then you have to be content with them not accepting your advice, right? And I want to just speak a little bit to people feeling more unstable by the time that we're in. And a lot of people's anxiety comes out in trying to order their space, in trying to order their thoughts, in trying to organize and control. And the same thing comes out as in our parenting, right? We try to bring more order to our adult children's lives. We try to help get them organized when they don't want our help. And so, but I wanted to bring out the 2 points is, Jules, is that doing it and feeling at peace with it are two different things, aren't
Absolutely, because what ends up happening is it's oftentimes very different from how I would view things, or it doesn't
they?
make much sense. And
Right,
then when I'm like, help me make sense of what you are saying,
right,
and it makes sense to them. And that's when
right,
it's like, just shut my little behind up and just,
right,
like you said, sit in the back. I can't
right,
even watch the road at this point. I'm just kind of like, let me just sit in the back and read that book. I think that's an excellent
right,
analogy, because watching the road, I can see things, and then how much of it
right,
is my anxiety projecting, and I'm
right.
not sure.
And And that's why I say read a book is like you're deliberately distracting yourself, right? You're holding on to your life with some of the things you don't necessarily agree with, but you're stepping out in faith by reading that book and letting them guide themselves. It's so hard. I'm so with Jules and Dee and Kelly on this point. I mean, it's one of the most difficult things for me right now is to not just not give advice and not to always feel like I have to weigh in, but me feeling comfortable with that and not
Right,
feeling anxious about that. Because I have to admit that makes me anxious to not say.
right. Somebody raised their hands as well, so please feel free to come off of mute. You can hit *6 if you're on your phone to get off of mute. Oh, she raised her hand, so we'll see. Maybe she'll come off in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
I love, and Dee commented on that last on Jules, where it says speaking in a way that doesn't seem logical to me.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're on your phone, you hit *6 to come off of mute. Let me see if I can do it over here.
Kelly, she said she's having trouble coming off mute. She may disconnect
Mm-hmm.
and come back on. Oh,
Oh,
there she is.
Okay.
uh-oh.
I'm gonna go with the someone in the chat who was talking about her son, her adult son, young adult son, lost his dad in January. Heartbreaking, heartbreaking. Um, but listening, still finding herself wanting to jump into fix it mode. Some things I can't fix, which is heartbreaking. Yes, we don't want our children to have pain. We don't want our children to go through hardship. Um, so we will always, whether they're 22 or 2, try to solve it. But, the loss of the dad is not something you can fix. As hard as it is and as much as you want it, but this is definitely a time to stick close to him. Let him be your guide, but making sure you're in communications with him, making sure you're doing things with him, making sure you're there when he wants to talk. And like I said, what I crisis mode parenting to me is making sure you're there. Just like when a 3-year-old looks back and you're there with your 22-year-old, it's the same. So you might want, if you were dealing with him a couple of times a week, you might want to double that. And just make sure you're doing things with him, having dinner with him, taking walks with him, um, but sticking close by so that you're a resource and you're a shoulder for him to lean on, and for both of you all to lean on in these really, really troubling times. Hello, everyone. Does a caller want to get back on?
Yeah, her hand is up. Kelly, you're on
Okay,
mute.
go ahead.
Okay, I'm back now. Sorry, my controls all froze up. I
Mm-hmm.
was just going to speak on you mentioned peace, that peace with it. That's literally something I talked to my mom about yesterday. Because that's actually a feeling that I have. I have a really bad habit of being the solver. quite often, whether I'm asked to or not. And I've learned
Mm-hmm.
to step back and let go of that and to be able to
Mm-hmm.
listen and be present. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and even ask sometimes, do you want help or are you just telling me? And I'm here, whatever you want. Or
Mm-hmm.
if I'm not being asked, just to be there, especially in the situations I've had in the past where it's not I've seen how it's not received all the time, especially if they don't want it. I don't want to become a lecturer rather than
Mm-hmm.
a listening ear. And it feels good to me. At first it felt like, oh my God, you're making a terrible decision. Why are you doing that? I need to
Mm-hmm.
fix it. And now it feels like that's your journey. And I know where my
Mm-hmm.
place is, to I
Mm-hmm.
don't have adult children. My child is smaller, but even with her, um, sometimes she comes to me in distress. She has, a mood disorder, and I've learned to just be there. And she'll be
Right.
screaming and,
Right. It's
pleading,
kind of
and
what
I'm
I
just
was just
there.
talking about. Yeah, it's kind of like what we were just talking about, right? Just sitting there,
Yeah,
right? Not feeling like you got to calm her, not feeling like just like letting it run out. Now,
right,
now, will we have to do things in the future because we can't? We want to get her to the point where she voices her opinions and feelings before it gets to meltdown. Yes,
right.
but at this moment, the right thing for you to do is that maybe just to sit there, maybe sit on a pillow next to her, maybe rub on her leg. But I'm happy that you're working through the part where you don't always feel like you have to solve. And when we think about trying to solve everyone's problems, including our children's, a lot of times that has to do with pressures that are and traumas that are put on women and traumas that are put on people that are in minoritized groups, where we try to fix everything. We don't want our children to struggle, right? I used to work at this place, and the guys say we want our kids to be problem solvers, but don't want them to have any problems. So a part of the discomfort that we're talking about here this morning has to do with not always jumping in, feeling like you have to solve their problems. If they give you the suggestion that they don't want your help, backing up and being able to go to your space and feeling calm about it. And again, don't think the calm part and the at peace part are the part that I think most parents will always struggle with. But it seems like to me that you've worked your way a lot through.
Yeah, I definitely it's progress. And that what you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned about coming back to it later, just that
Mm-hmm.
understanding that if I don't address it right now, it's not the end of
Mm-hmm.
the world, and getting rid of that
Right,
anxiety. Like, we can talk about it
right,
in an hour or tomorrow.
right.
Or-
Well, it's so funny because when I was training to be a psychologist, one of my best mentors said to me, I would always be down on myself if I missed the issue in counseling, right? And he would always say to me, Linda, it's their core conflict. It's going to come back. So don't worry about it. So the message that I have about being silent at a particular point is that if it's one of their issues, it's going to come back up, right? And number two, um, is that divine faith to know when the timing is right. And that's what I'm really working on now. It's like you want to say something, it's the right thing to say, but with a young adult child, figuring out when to say it is a hard. So I always pray and ask guidance about when to bring it up, right? Because that time that you're sitting there and he's all steamed up may not be the right time. And just but there always comes a time where that subject comes up or where that issue comes up where you can bring it up and everyone's calmer. And again, one of the things I learned in training is we always try to strike while the iron is hot. And what they teach us in family systems and working with children is that the best time to work with kids is when they're not upset and you're not upset. So like strike when the iron is cold, right? When you're not in the middle of a crisis. So I hope that helps.
Absolutely. And then another part to that is something that I've been working through with my child and my adult niece, who's like a child to me, is that fear of them making a mistake,
Mhm,
or making a decision that I don't feel is right, and letting go of that and being that it's okay
mhm.
if they make a mistake, and accepting that they're not going to make the choices that I want all the time, and that's okay.
Right,
And
right,
that I might not agree with it, and that is
right.
okay.
You might think it's atrocious, but you know what? I want to challenge all of us, and I'm including myself in this too, because I'm on my journey with my own child. But it's I want us to challenge ourselves to think about the decisions that we made between 17 and 26, 27, and think about how many of them were just plain boneheaded, okay, and how we survived or wrong or not in our best interest. But we worked through it. We took the hits. We took financial hits. Some of us took hits in, even a series of judicial systems. But may have lost a job, but you work your way through it, right? You figure out how to deal with conflict. You figure it out. And I think sometimes we forget that we were not fully formed at
Mhm.
18 or 22.
Yep. And in that respect, if we think about it, we're expecting someone who's not mentally or emotionally mature, and in my situation, who may or may not have, a mood disorder or an
A
emotional
mood
disorder, to
disorder.
make the
Yeah,
same healthy choices that we would make at our mature age with our
right.
clarity. And that expectation is just not really realistic.
No, no. And also because um issues of race too, the expectations on our children are high, and
Mhm.
they're not allowed because of society to make mistakes. Like I have to tell myself sometimes this is just a mistake that would normally happen. But because I have a black son, he's not allowed to make those mistakes because, the stakes are so high, but they're still young men, right? They're still young men. So we have to like protect them to make mistakes because they're going to make them.
That's true. Um, Another person just asked, what is the best approach when the problems always involve money? My 30-year-old son lives with me, can't keep a job, low wages,
Mm,
due to immaturity.
um, that's a hard one. Not knowing all the circumstances, I can just say these are issues that are coming up more. When I always say to y'all every time I'm on here, rip from the headlines. These are the issues that I'm getting calls about the most because the percentage of kids under 30, young adults under 30 that are still living with their parents is going up and up and up because of economics in this country. So we're all going to be facing kids coming home, staying home, and so one of the things that I try to work on with families that come to me to consult is even if your child is an adult, you're entitled to a couple of things. You are entitled to respect in your home, and with issues of money, um, you know, to set some boundaries around them. So they may be living in your house, and if the wages are low, they may not be contributing much to home, but at least you're not necessarily giving them money, right? So like think about some reasonable, rational boundaries given where you are. Like you're not. It sounds like to me we're not going to be dealing with a fully functioning, independent person next week. But given that we aren't, what's a bridge? At least you got to handle your own expenses. At the end of the year, I want you to pick up your phone. Like what are some reasonable, rational things that you can help your child build up um, some financial savvy and some financial resources, and you putting some boundaries around what you personally going to spend.
And what would that look like, the specific boundary? What would you write? Like, what does that,
Um,
what's an
like like
example?
maybe like what I have what I've been negotiating with some families now is like your child has a job, but they don't make enough to take care of themselves. Okay, but what's the reasonable, if you're going to be helping them, what's a reasonable Uber amount? Like, I just work with some families where we negotiated how much Uber they would be allowed on their parents' credit card, right? How much DoorDash? Because like if we just give them blindly everything, they're never gonna learn that look, you can get 4 DoorDashes or you can get $150 worth of groceries that will last you way more than 4 meals, right? So to start putting parameters around what you will and will not cover, when is a rational deadline for them to start picking up some of their own expenses, and if there are issues that they can't do it because of mental health, then understanding, as one of the previous callers said, that you're going to have to address those mental health issues. And that is very difficult with a child that's 30, because if they're not in therapy, they don't want to be in therapy. It's very, very hard to make headway. But I've had some success with Black male groups. I've had some success with putting Black boys into training with a physical trainer, all kinds of ways to start getting them out of the house and, basically working on that depression and anxiety, even if it's not by a therapist. Kelly, did they answer your question?
That did. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so for the caller, I see your note. Give some lead time though. The question is, trying to get him to pay for his phone. Okay, don't do it tomorrow, but have a talk with him about, this is April. By September 1, I want you to pick up your phone. Get your own phone plan. So that gives him time to investigate, gives you some lead time, but it gives him a path.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We get fed up as parents. That's another thing I'm going to say. And again, I'm putting myself in this group. And then we also just want to like flip the switch. Oh, I'm just tired of this. He's 30. I'm just going to cut it off. But that's, the on off doesn't work a lot. So you have to transition them. It's everybody's responsibility to get you've gotten into a place where you're fed up, but the next step is still to do the transition and not just the cutoff. Because you want to keep focused on the fact that your point is still to build skills
Mm-hmm.
and build pride. Pride in, oh, I'm taking care of my own phone bill, or I'm paying my own auto insurance.
Yeah. Yeah. It's good. I need to do the same thing with with the big one. The one that just called this
I
morning.
mean, and someone, I've had parents that start to at least charge rent, but take the money and maybe put it away for them for rent for apartment fund. In that way, like I had a friend of mine that collected rent for 3 years and then helped them with the down payment on a condo.
Mm-hmm.
So there's ways to do it, but they don't, because they grow up the way most of the people that are listening on this call and their children growing up in a middle class or up lifestyle. So they don't necessarily teach these things in school. They're only going to learn them financial responsibility from us. And I don't know about you all, but I ran out of time for that before my 18-year-old left the home. And so like now I'm finding myself talking a lot about money and finances and wills and mortgages and stuff like that
Mm-hmm.
now. So it's not too late, but you have to start somewhere.
There's a great comment that says it took a while, but I asked for 30% of whatever he earns at whatever job as a healthy boundary for
Mm-hmm.
housing. That's a great idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a really great idea.
And those of you know that, you know, with the rising cost of everything, that 30% may not be a lot with your kids' piecemeal jobs, but it's something. It's giving them a start of learning how to pay a bill. Because a lot of our children don't even know how to pay a bill.
Mm, that's correct.
They think I don't know how they think that DoorDash and all these people get paid, but it's going on your credit card. And for you to start transferring even like one thing to their credit card
Hmm.
so that they can see, or their ATM card. I had my son say to me a couple of weeks ago, I want to join this league, but it was $100, and I'm like, oh yeah, it hits different when it's your $100,
Right.
right?
Right.
Instead of
Absolutely.
just that magical money that comes out of mommy's checking account.
Absolutely. So true.
Kelly, what do you do about money? How do you
Funny that
deal
you
with
say that with it's funny that you should say that. When Kyle was here, he's back in Boulder now. He was doing some work with like PA production assistant type work for some events. And I said to him he needed to save, half of
it?
whatever he makes, just as a general rule, put it aside. And but I didn't enforce it. And then he
Mm-hmm.
went back to Boulder, and last weekend he was texting me. Um, I hadn't heard from him in a couple weeks, but then he texted,
Mm-hmm.
Can you Zelle so and so some money for such and such? And my response was no. And it
Mm-hmm.
was the first time I ever said no to him. But it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't a
Mm-hmm.
long drawn out. It wasn't a
Mm-hmm.
you need to get a job. It was none of that. It was just
Mm-hmm.
no. And he
Yeah.
responded, okay. And that was it. It
Right.
was
Right.
very different because normally I'd say, sure, no
Right.
problem. Always,
Right. And
I
you
can,
know, and then it's a perfect response. You didn't give him a lecture. You just said, I'm not spending my money to that end at this exact moment.
yeah, no,
Right. And you know, later a follow up might be, you know, I'm here to cover your food and clothing, or I'm here to, you know, give you this, you know, but I'm not going to be covering these things in the future. Just
right.
so you're clear. So he doesn't go out and run up what he can't pay for.
Exactly. Yeah, so that felt good. It was very empowering. It was, choosing to make
No,
an
no
empowering
is
decision.
no is no is one of the most empowering words in the English language.
Yeah. So that was good. Felt good. Different, but good.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have guilt like I would normally have had before.
Right, right.
No, just no.
It feels to me, I don't know if this is the right word, but I'm just gonna say it. It feels like you stood up for yourself.
Yes.
No,
Yes. Yes. So that felt
because
good.
he knows that you feel that guilt, and he uses it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
There's
Anyone
some
else
good
have
stuff
something
here
you're
today,
dealing with this?
y'all.
What'd you say?
I said there's some good stuff here, y'all. We don't, you know,
Mhm.
and we don't have to stay on money. Anybody else have questions or thoughts or
There's a comment that says, this topic touches my heart. My adult son, who was homeless but now has an apartment that I pay for, calls, wants to talk, but refuses to see a therapist and talk about his
Mhm.
issues. This is not sustainable, and I'm getting too old for this. That I was sharing
again?
earlier, this is what happened with me this morning.
Mhm.
Kyle
Mhm.
called and was on the phone over an hour and a half,
Mhm.
just
Mhm.
wanting to talk. And he said, I don't need a therapist. And
Mhm.
he said, I don't need a therapist. Last time I talked to somebody, they had me sent away, went on and on and
Mhm.
on, but it's not sustainable. So what does a person do? Like this person
You
does.
know, this is not within your control entirely, right? And again, you know, I always am seeing if the person refuses therapy, there's not a lot you can do. But you know, it seems like to me you've come to some sort of a compromise where you're still paying for housing. But I do think that sometimes a conversation, again, Your mileage may vary, and you all know what y'all situations are. So be sensitive to the fact that you know what you can say to your child at a particular time that won't cause further harm. Okay, I just want to be clear with that. But sometimes you can say, son, you call me every day with the same problem. But there are ways to work through this problem that are not just involve me listening to you go on. You're using that as an excuse to not deal with your problems. There are vehicles, there are therapists, there are groups, there are social groups, all kinds of people around that are trained to help you and can get you to the life that you want to have. But it's just not always me. And I know this is going to sound tough, but sometimes it's just not being so available. Like, just because they call you every day doesn't mean you have to talk to them every day. Someone said their therapist told them it's okay to say, I don't want to talk about this anymore if you're not going to do anything about it. Wow. I mean, I was even more direct than what I said earlier. But there are no lies told. Like I said, son, we've talked about this, or I'm not trying to discriminate against boys, but daughter, we've talked about this. We talked about this a million times. And today it's just not a good day for me, right? Or again, not being available every morning at 9 for them to call and repeat the same things over and over. It's okay to take care of you while you're trying to take care of your child, your adult child. But a lot of people on here today are really struggling with to sort of underline the theme, are really struggling with the fact that their children are not independent but are refusing help.
Mhm. Dee has her hand up as well.
Okay, go ahead, Dee.
Hi. So listening to what everyone is saying and reading what's in the chat, there is definitely an intersectionality between the mental health challenges
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
that either ourselves or our loved ones are having.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also, like, when we're talking about money, the issue isn't necessarily the money. There are other things that are at
Yeah,
play
yeah.
that doesn't allow you to keep a job, or that's making you emotionally
Mm-hmm.
mature. And examining those other things really are key. And
Yeah.
Dr. Linda, you mentioned it before, being Black in itself has pressures, even without
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
mental challenges. Being a male in itself is challenging,
Mm-hmm.
even when someone
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have, being a child, being of a certain demographic. And so it's when we isolate these things, it makes it harder for reaching our children when they're feeling all of those things at once. So, if they're focused on these five things and we're only focused on the therapy part, this is why they think
Right.
hear them, because it's all
Right.
things, not just one of those things. But
Right.
just sorry, because I'm seeing that many of what people are talking about are their sons. I just put a link in the chat, so if everyone could look at that. We have a men's event coming up on April 18th where it's men only, over 18. So they're still a man if they're 18. But maybe because they need a space where they can talk about what they want to talk
Mm-hmm.
about, how they want to talk about it. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe they think all therapists are women, or all therapists are
Mm-hmm.
related. Like, who knows what they're thinking? I'm back to the earlier caller's comment of us just thinking they're not logical. Like, we don't even understand
Mm-hmm.
what it is you're trying to say. I mean, it doesn't negate or minimize what they're thinking or feeling. We really just don't understand the thought process and the logic. Um, so that we're now providing that space to see if maybe that's what it is. So for some of these women whose sons are saying that they don't want to see a therapist, maybe being in a room with other Black men and even powerful Black men, maybe would be one step in that direction.
Right. And I have never advocated, nor would I. There, a lot of boys, when you say the word therapy, they're just going to walk in the opposite direction. But what we learned and research that we have coming out on Black men and young Black boys is that when their teacher is Black, when there's somebody in the school from the janitor to the principal takes an interest in them, when they have a relative that they can go to, even if they're struggling with us or their parents, if it's a basketball league, I mean, I just feel like whatever that we can do or get them into, to start dealing with, as Dee so correctly pointed out, are the underlying issues, is productive. But we can't look at our changing and making our children change without looking at the systemic problems, and not just putting it all off on their own efforts.
Linda, that's so
So,
true because, you know, I'm
mhm,
often telling parents that we can't refer or think back to how we were raised or what our parents would or would not have done, because that's
mhm,
usually what I'm hearing. You know, parents are parenting from a place of
yeah,
memory. You know, like
right,
if I would have said this to my mom, she wouldn't have. And
right,
that's our kids immediately shut down when you say that.
right.
Or if I
Well,
had
yeah,
your age, I would have appreciated it. You know,
right.
the kids really do, you know, not really blaming us because we parent from how we know, but I can see it with my own kids. They don't want to hear that because it makes,
Well, and that's one of the reasons why I really wanted to be on SonRise, and why I'm writing a book about parent healing, is that what what happened to us in 1980 or 1975 has nothing to do with our children 2024 in Bethesda. What our parents did with us, some of it was good and some of it wasn't. And when we say some of the things that we try with these kids because it's what we know, just doesn't work with them. And it's hard for us to face, because I think it feels like we're rejecting our parenting, but it just doesn't work with these kids. And so that's one of the realizations when people come to me, they were like, well, we were spanked and we're fine, and or we did this and we're fine, and we put our kid out at 18 and we made it. I'm like, yeah, but we're also not doing very well as a result of that. So just understand that the old methods, I can't criticize all of them, and I definitely can praise the fact that many of our parents put good values in us, and that's universal. But some of the old methods do require some evolution and do require some changes. Um, so in the chat also, there's talk about these underlying problems, right? The underlying issues of ADHD, depression, and anxiety. Like, you can't have, if you have a child that's dealing with all three of those things, then you have to really start to try to address those things. Like, when I'm dealing particularly with ADHD and mood disorders, it's a whole different glide path. It's a whole different trajectory. And I'm trying to work to shake parents from having he has to go to college at 18 and 1 month trajectory that's in your head. But again, start thinking about, how do we treat the ADHD, getting child accommodation, getting them treatment and support in whatever way that we can. So yes, we have to deal with those underlying issues. Um, Someone else says that it sounds like children are often leaning on their mothers for emotional support. Are they going out to their dads and other male figures to get support? What do y'all say to that? Anybody have a response to that? In your view, are the men getting asked to support?
Dr. Linda,
Anybody?
I think
Uh-huh.
this is definitely a much bigger conversation, and I actually wrote it
Mm-hmm.
down to discuss. Um, the role that each parent plays in the
Right.
development and
Right.
healing of this.
Right.
I know
Right.
we each
Right.
have our own theories, but that, I'd love to have a session to go over that. But I think that's a much bigger question. I don't know if you saw my
Yes.
response to that in the comment. Like if they are not going to their fathers or male figures for support, the question is why not?
Right. Right. Is it a place where they feel like they can go? But you're right. This is maybe we'll talk about this at the 418 meeting, but you're right. It's a subject for another discussion. Um, I want to just take this comment about tough love. Tough love is so hard to administer. I'm learning how to be tough without being mean or feeling angry or guilty. All right. Yes. It's like learning how to, that's why I don't really use those words, because to me, they mean so many different things to so many different people. What I said earlier, and I'll stick by, is boundaries. Right? How do you set boundaries without being angry, without being defensive, without a resentment towards your child, right? Because that's a lot of the things that we don't talk about. We're conditioned not to talk about, and again, that's a subject for another day. Is how negative feelings that we have toward our own children who are struggling. Um, so you're right, Dee. I think that is the subject of another conversation. But for some reason today, it feels like that people are saying that a lot of the responsibility, or some of the responsibility of financially caring for and addressing underlying issues goes to the mother.
I think part of that is that mothers are just more likely to make themselves available for that support
Right.
and to problem solve. And
Right.
sometimes it's a good thing, and sometimes it becomes like a crutch because I can go to my mom. She's going to solve it. She's going to listen to
Right.
it. Um, yeah, I
Right.
know with me when I was younger, my mom, if I really wanted help, I'm going to go to my mom. And when I went to my dad, I'm going to think twice about it, which felt
Mm-hmm.
uncomfortable, like he's not going to give it to me. But at the same time, I knew I could go to my mom. Hey, mom, I need help with my light bill. She's going to
Mm-hmm.
pay it. But my dad, I'm going to have to come with, can you help me with part of it? Because this and this is my plan. And this is how it's not going to happen next month. And this is not going to be
Right.
repetitive. And it was uncomfortable, but it was healthy. But it also created this feeling of when I need you, I can't just go to you. So it's kind of
Right.
a double-edged sword, but I think there's
Right.
something to that men are not as emotionally available for that, and they're not as willing to be problem solvers for you, which can be kind of a scary thing, but it can also be a good thing. And then if we look at where men are right now with their mental health, I think that men are just feeling unsupported and like they can't be emotionally vulnerable. And then how can we expect for
Right.
them to be a place to go to when they don't know what that looks like, or they haven't opened themselves to that in themselves? So I think there's definitely something to it why men are not the go-to. And I think part of it is a healthy type of boundary, and part of it is a doesn't feel safe.
Right. Your point about being a double-edged sword is so right, because it's really nuanced, right? If you have a parent that feels one way, you have a parent that feels another way, they may have their own benefits. But the consensus on our chat is that there is an element of unavailability with men, right? Either emotionally, financially, or they themselves are dealing with issues like substance abuse. Um, so that element ran through several of the comments. Um, my son rarely goes to his dad. I think he feels like his dad is in denial about his mental health issues. So yeah, being in a place where you could recognize that your child has a mental health issue is requires huge amount of vulnerability, huge amounts of struggle. And if you yourself are traumatized, it's very hard for you to admit and not deny that your child has a mental health issue. I get that a lot in terms of practice, where people are like, he's just lazy, he's just this, he's spoiled. What does he have to be depressed about? But what that says to me oftentimes is that the parents are dealing with their own trauma and the inability to feel vulnerable enough to accept and admit that your child is struggling with mental health issues. We have time for one more person to chime in or to unmute themselves or weigh in. Kelly, I am going to turn it back over to you with the sort of summation here of today. We talked a lot about factors in raising burgeoning adults. And the one thing that we talked about, a lot of things we talked about boundaries, being at peace with getting in the driver's seat and giving your child autonomy, even when the things don't make any sense to us. We talked about financial support and boundaries around money. And then we sort of ended here when Miss D talked about we can't address the money issues unless we're looking at the systems, right? We're looking at their mental health, their physical health, the world around us. And so, with that, I'm going to turn it back to Kelly to close out today. Kelly, are you there?
I'm here. Sorry, I had something going on with my throat. Thank you, Dr. Linda, for being here, and everybody who asked a question or spoke up or shared. Appreciate that. This is our safe space for us to be vulnerable and to know that you're not alone, because everything that's in this chat, most of us on this phone call have gone through or are going through or are dealing with. And I find it interesting how just today, this morning, before this call, I was dealing with a lot of these issues with my 21-year-old, with Kyle. And I'm so grateful for this space, because how I was able to respond or not, which was really the key, not, but really just listen, um, was different. And it's because of being here for 4 years and learning from you, Dr. Linda, and everybody else that's here, people that speak up. So I appreciate that. Thank you for being here as always. And I will close this out with a prayer. Thank you, Father, for this week, for this morning, for this day. Thank you for Dr. Linda and so many people who are always here with us, supporting our families, supporting our own journey and our own self-healing. Help us, Father, know that it's okay to say no, that it's okay to have boundaries, that it's okay to help our children learn to live as adults. And it's also okay to say yes to ourselves. Help us learn to love ourselves, to focus on our own self-care while our children are on their own journeys. Help us create some self-care rituals. Help us and guide us this week while we are working to have faith over fear. Help us and help our children and protect our children. Keep them safe, keep them well, and help them learn that it's okay to say yes to external help and therapists. Here's to a peaceful and powerful and productive, purposeful week. Thank you so much. Amen. We'll be back next week at 9 a.m. Thank you, Dr. Linda, again. Safe travels.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Yes. Have a wonderful day. See you next week. Bye-bye.